The original motion is that this House calls for the continued review and updating of policies to better support families, as well as the marriage and parenthood aspirations for Singaporeans, and endorses a whole-of-society approach to build a Singapore made for families. Mr Leong's proposed amendment is to delete the words continued review and updating and substitute instead the word reimagination. There are two reasons why I would not support the amendment. The first is that in this context, it's actually not a step forward, it's a step back. And second, it is tied to a policy which is problematic. And let me explain why. So the first reason, why do I say that the amendment is actually a step back? Well, it's because in this debate, I think Mr. Leong, Ms. Hazel Pua, and Mr. Louis Chua have sought to portray the MNP measures that we have at the moment as incremental. So in other words, not bold enough, not doing enough, therefore you need to reimagine something. But the point is this, in the last few years, we've already started the reimagination process. It's called Forward SG. And if you look at what we did with Forward SG, you will see that when Forward SG was launched, then DPM Lawrence Wong said at the launch of the Forward Singapore exercise in June 2022 that the 4G team was going to embark on an exercise to review and refresh our social compact and chart a roadmap for the next decade and beyond. So we've already started the reimagination process. The boat called reimagination has already left port and is sailing. It is heading out towards open waters, it's chugging along, it's picking up speed, and we are implementing, adding on, and enhancing as we go. So, to ask us in this amendment to start reimagination is kind of like a step back. It's kind of like going to the port, whereas the ship has already sailed. And that's the reason why I would not agree to the amendment. That's the first reason. But there's a second reason, and it's a bit problematic. That's because in his speech on calling for reimagination, Mr. Leong has also said that we need to adopt certain policies, and one of the central ones is the Affordable Homes Scheme. The other ideas and suggestions certainly we can think about and explore, but the Affordable Homes Scheme is the one that removes the price of land when pricing flats upfront, and that is problematic because PSP's Affordable Homes Scheme is akin to a prepaid rental scheme that turns Singaporeans from homeowners to tenants, and users only have the option to buy the flat at the point when they are actually going to sell it. And it's a raid on the reserves. So for that reason, because in the context of this amendment, reimagination entails certain policies put forward by PSP, of which a key one is the Affordable Homes Scheme, which constitutes, amongst other things, a raid on the reserves, and I cannot support it.
I want to ascertain whether we are debating this as a national emergency or not. The next thing is that the minister mentioned about reimagining. Okay, so we raised the issue that the current and also our colleagues, my colleagues from Workers' Party also agree to that the current policies are obviously inadequate, right? So as a result, we need to have new policies, and there is a basis for us to say why the current policies need in reimagining. They are so we would like the minister to agree. I would like to ask the minister whether she agrees that when we imagined what I have suggested in my speech, for example, we are actually trying to engage all the stakeholders, a whole of society approach. The whole of society approach, when hearing from the office bearer, seems to be a shirking of responsibility. Say that it is not just the responsibility of the government, the society also has to help. But to us, the whole of society approach is that you must provide more fiscal incentives to involve more stakeholders. And does the minister agree that in our recommendation of the new policies, actually we actually consider stakeholders like the employers? Okay, you ask the employers to have more FWAs, you ought to give them more fiscal incentives. We talk about engaging the community, engaging the extended family, the grandparents who are giving care to the children. They ought to be remunerated. So we are trying to expand the scope of thinking. It's not just what the government has been doing, just from government to the parents. And furthermore, we are also expanding into thinking about the mental health of the children. When we say reimagining, we are, of course, confident that there are many gaps in the government, in the current policies of the government. The TFR cannot be improved. You have to do something about it. You didn't solve the problem, right?
I think it is a very important national issue. Emergency sort of suggests the idea of all alarm bells ringing, everybody rushing around and so on. But our approach is when you have a serious national issue, you look at it calmly, coolly, you understand what the issues are, and you then take the necessary steps to address them. And that leads on to his next point about reimagining, because Mr. Leong said that, have we engaged the stakeholders? And that's exactly what I was explaining just now. That was the whole purpose of the Forward SG exercise. And in fact, even before that, we had the Singapore Together conversations. So the point I'm making about the reimagination process, leave aside the policies that he has suggested. The amendments made it appear as though we have not even embarked on thinking about reimagining Singapore. And my reply to that was, we have already started the reimagination process, and we have done that under Forward SG, and we've done the engagements. In fact, if you take into account all the people that we have engaged through the various exercises, it's almost like 200,000 people, and that would include the families, family members, parents, etc. Then I think the next point that Mr. Leong raised was talking about whether the policies at work resulting in a low total fertility rate. I think the point I made in my speech, which I must reiterate here, is that declining total fertility rate is a global trend. It's not just Singapore. We started this whole process before, this reimagination process before. We talked to people to understand what their concerns were. And the concerns were, as I mentioned in my speech, space, housing, costs for child raising, education or competitive stress, and time. And so we developed our policies specifically in response to what they told us, and this resulted in the reclassification framework, this resulted in the enhanced baby bonus, this resulted in the enhancements to childcare, this resulted in the shared parental leave, all of the things which I outlined.
When we compare the global trend of TFR, why don't we compare ourselves with France, compare ourselves with those countries? Because although you have quoted a downward trend in the TFR as a global phenomenon, but other countries are able to maintain it at above 1.5, but we are 0.97. So does that difference mean there is a responsibility that the government has to take?
The suggestion seems to be that government is responsible for 0.97 TFR. I think that that's not the case. It's a global trend. There are many factors which are affecting TFR, and I've listed them. No need to go through them again. But what can the government do? The government can do its very best to facilitate and try to make sure that we have an ecosystem and an environment that's as supportive of parents and couples and of marriage and parenthood as possible. As far as this government's concerned, we want to make a Singapore that's made for families, and we are encouraging marriage and parenthood. So it's very odd because Mr. Leong says the government says something when the government has not said any such thing. Our policy is working. We have policies in the past which took us up to a certain point, but remember, we recognize that changes need to be made and things need to be looked at afresh, and that is exactly why we implemented Forward SG, and that's why we embarked on the process of looking at what new policies we can introduce. So insofar as he says set a target, you can't just set a target for women to have children just like that. That's really, I don't think that families or mothers will just produce big babies just because you set them a target. Having children is a personal decision, and it's really up to parents to decide if they want to have children. What we can and are doing is trying to make it as facilitative and as comfortable as possible for them to do so.